Thank you so much for joining us today. Ricky regrets not being here. He has COVID, but nonetheless, we know you'll enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Quilt Show. Maria Shell is back today with inspiration on working improvisationally. You won't want to miss today's show. Stick around. It's going to be a blast. And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the Quilt Show. I'm so glad you're with us today. Well, we have a repeat guest, I think 5 years ago. Her work is very, very colorful, distinctive, and yet she's taking her quilting journey in yet another direction. That's one of the really cool things about quilting, is that what you can do and what you can learn never ends. So please welcome our guest from Alaska, Maria Shell. Hello.
Hi, Alex.
Please sit down. Thank you so much for coming back. I mean, a lot has changed in 5 years, huh?
Yeah, a lot for everybody, really.
Really? I didn't notice.
Yeah.
So what would you say you're mostly known for?
Well, I started out as a traditional quilt maker, and then I took a series of courses with Nancy Crow, which I still do, and that really changed my approach to cutting, piecing, and stitching, as well as color. So taking the traditional, grounded in traditional work, but moving into improvisational, not using a ruler, but I still really love the traditional quilt blocks, and so they show up in my work on a regular basis.
And in case people missed the show, and I have it here, it's show 2208, let's take a look at Bliss, because this to me identifies you. Tell us about this, please.
Yeah, so Bliss is connected to a series that's called Color Grids. And within that series, I'm manipulating 3 traditional quilt elements. One of them is the quarter log cabin. And the other component would be, sometimes I piece those quarter log cabins into what I call a cross square, which would be, you can kind of see that in the block. But then the third component is the sashing. So sometimes the quilts have the quarter log cabins, and they're arranged in a certain way with sashing. Other times they are arranged without the sashing, or they might just be the cross square block. Lots of color. I like things to vibrate.
Well, I was going to ask you, how does that happen? Because it's kind of like, whoa, on your eyes.
It's a combination of things.
Okay.
It's color, right? So if you put colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, you're going to get a level of vibration, especially if they are similar in value.
Okay.
So if you have a red and a green that are of the similar level of saturation, you put them next to each other in a similar proportion, you're going to get a vibration happening. The other thing, which is sort of, I think a lot of people don't know this, but in a traditional quilt where everything's measured and everything's the same, your eye's going to look at it and it's going to recognize the sameness. It's like, oh, okay, I understand. But when it's cut without a ruler, there's irregularities.
And that was cut without a ruler?
Yes, parts of it, not all of it.
Okay.
Like there's points where I come in with a ruler to square stuff out. But the irregularity, your eye is like, whoa, I think that's exactly all the same, but then it's not, right? So that encourages the eye to continue to look at the work.
So I want to take a look at the next quilt, because when I saw it, I thought, no, that can't be yours. But then I looked at the piecing, and it's yours. Kind of subtle.
Yeah, it is. So, I'm on Instagram, and I will post things, and people are always like, well, why don't you just be a little less bold? Or why don't you just be, more minimal or more calm? And this is sort of my attempt at that. So it's a very restricted palette, very much pastels, but it's the same block. If you look at it, it's the exact same block as what we saw in the quilt called Bliss.
So was that, I love neutral quilts, but sometimes in the middle of making them, I just want to let blood, because the color's not there. Did that happen, or was it joyous all the way through? Is that a weird question?
No, it's not a weird question
Okay.
at all, because what happens is, I'm like, okay, I'm strictly doing neutrals. I'm strictly doing pastels. I'm really making it as light as possible. But as I was working, I was like, so I kept splicing in more and more brighter pastels, to
Love
get,
it.
because I just love contrast. And you can get contrast with neutrals or pastels.
Well, it's a whole
but-
different thing when you
yeah.
look at it.
Yes.
So let's take a look at the owls.
Okay.
Tell us the story.
Yeah, Owsley's Owls. This is an older quilt, but it's relevant to some of the things that I'm working on right now. And I will say this quilt started in a Roberta Horton class. Yes,
Rest
I
in peace.
know. And I think it's in her folk art class. And she encourages you to cut directly into the fabric and then use that fabric to build other things. So I took it very seriously to cut into the fabric in the actual pattern. So all of those owls have fabric that I've cut the shapes out and then used them to assemble the owls. And in the process of doing that, I realized, this is a lot like scrapbooking, right? Yes, and almost anyone can cut paper, right? Scissors, paper, and then I could take this and translate it into the community quilts that I do. So basically, when I build a community quilt, I have prepped all this fabric. I use Wonder Under because it has that release paper on the back. So once you put the Wonder Under on, and I make the sheets of paper about 8 by 20, and I have a whole table of the fabric that's already prepped, and then I give people their base fabric.
Oh, how fun.
And then they
how
cut out
fun.
the shapes, and then they assemble their blocks, and then I can incorporate them into a community quilt.
Okay, so tell me about that, because you're always involved with a community quilt, and
Yep.
you're on a new one right now.
Yep. Well, should we talk about the Memphis quilt first?
Sure.
Okay, so the Memphis quilt, because one leads into the
Okay,
other one.
sure.
So the Memphis quilt I did in Memphis. It was a part of a 2-month-long celebration called Stitched. And Paula Kovarik, who is a really well-known art quilter and an amazing organizer. So she organized this event. It was 2 months long. And one of the events was to have me come in and build a quilt. So we had 2 sessions of people making quilt blocks. And then I had a small team that helped me assemble them. And we built and spelled out the words Memphis. So the current quilt I'm working on is called United States of Uterus, and it is about reproductive rights. And what I've done is I've solicited a quilt block from 50 artists in 50 states, telling their personal stories or their state stories about reproductive rights.
Okay.
And then I'm going to take them all and I'm going to build this giant uterus.
You signed up for something.
Yes.
Can you visualize it in your brain?
Oh yeah, so that's
Okay.
part of why looking at that Memphis quilt where we spelled out the letters.
Right.
Instead of
right.
spelling out letters, I'm going to build this uterus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to take a look at MXY.
Oh, McCarthy Road. Yeah.
Yes.
So that quilt is, for many years I was involved in a group called Cloth in Common, which is a small international group of quilt artists, and every 2 months one of us would give everyone else a prompt. Well, everybody had to do the prompt, right? And for some people, they might not know what prompt means. It's the same as a challenge. So in a guild, if you get a challenge,
Right, it's a prompt. Yeah.
Yes. So for McCarthy Road, which is a quilt that I made while I was involved in Cloth in Common, and they have a website. It's super cool to look at because the artists post. So every week there's a different artist talking about their work, and then there's the big ta-da at the end of
Fun.
all of the quilts. So the prompt was road. And this is McCarthy Road. We have a cabin in McCarthy, Alaska, which is in the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. And this is, to get there, the last 60 miles are a dirt road that used to be a train track. So it takes you about 2 hours to drive 60 miles.
Bumpity, bump.
Yes, washboard all the way. And so that quilt is a depiction of that. The other thing that quilt is my first book, which is called I want to call it Making Prints. It's called Improv Patchwork, and I used all the units from that book to build that quilt.
Fun. All right, and then I want to talk about, you're onto kind of a ripple thing, soft curves. That
yeah,
can't
yeah.
be yours.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of curves and circles because I teach a class called Circle and Curve Sampler, and it's really, what I've been exploring right now. So I've gone from the lines, the linear shapes, into these curvy
circles.
shapes. And today we're going to be demoing how
cool.
to do this.
Oh,
So
cool.
I call it a braided curve. And I bet, Alex, you've been exposed to the beginnings of a braided curve because we start out with a simple curve.
Well, we will see.
And then I braid it.
And then tic-tac-toe.
Is related to that same thing. So it's circle and curve, it's from the class Circle and Curve Sampler. And early on, when I first started teaching on the road, I had a guild that asked me, they said, well, we want this class, but will you make a sample? And I didn't have a sample for the class, so I thought, all right, this is my sampler. And it features the braided curves, log cabin circles, which are the circles in the center, and then what I call squaring the circle, which makes the circle into a block.
Okay, now what we're going to do first teaching segment is we're going to get into triangles because you're jumping off into triangles, right?
It's another thing that I've been exploring. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with how you can take a strip set and cut it into a triangle. And depending upon the angle of the triangle and the direction of the lines of the strip set, all kinds of crazy things can happen.
Okay, everybody, let's stick around. I'm really looking forward to this, and it's so much fun to see your work and how you change and challenge and all that. Every quilt maker should be doing this. We'll see you in a minute. On the next quilt show, Carol Lyles Shaw says she was making modern quilts in the 90s, long before there was a modern movement. She has a fearless approach to using vibrant color. If you're modern curious, Carol invites you to see the power of working in a series. Plus, she's breaking new ground in how she works with African prints in her work. See how focusing on a fabric can get reimagined in a fractured, disappearing 9-patch.
This is the serendipity part. And here is our block. Yes!
This is the best.
I
Look
love
how
this.
happy it is. It's so happy. She's accomplished, she's Afro-modern, and she's right here on the next Quilt Show. You will not want to miss this episode. Welcome back. It's all about triangles and the amazing results you can get with them. So Maria Schell, before we get into the demo, I want to take a look at this quilt and specifically the back of it. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so this is the back of this quilt, which is called Bliss, and it is, the thing Alex wants me to share is that I always use cross weaves. And a cross weave has the warp and the weft are either dramatically or similar in color, but they create a little bit of a sheen. And there's several different brands. One of them is Oak Shop that you sell, right? Which is just beautiful colors. And I do that because I really want the quilting to show, as opposed to using a print. This is you're gonna see all my quilting.
And you do all this?
Yep, on my long arm.
You're pretty good. Do you want to be on thequiltshow.com?
Yes.
Come on out here. I'm playing with you.
Yes.
Okay, so basically tell us in a nutshell what you're going to be showing us so people can wrap their brain around it.
Yeah, of course. So let's start with, we're gonna start with an example.
Triangles.
Yeah, so the idea with this demo is that I'm gonna demonstrate 3 different types of what I call lines plus triangles equals squares. And we start out with a strip set, and these are...
And these are the cross weaves.
Yeah, these are... So in relationship to the back, because I use cross weaves for all the backs, I have a lot of leftovers. So that's where this quilt came from. It's just me, like a hypothesis. What's gonna happen if I cut all my leftovers into strips and sew them together? So this is what I got at first.
Okay.
Which is nice, but not super sexy, right? It's
Right.
just kind of, it's nice.
Well, that's kind of like right in...
That one, right?
Yeah, right here. It's a
So-
little bit more of a plain Jane than
Yep.
these guys.
Yep. So
Okay.
I thought, what could I do to fix that? And I think we all have had this experience where you have 2 strips of fabric and you sew them together and one's a little bit longer than the other one. So I started sewing all those little bits together. And
Think of how much I've tossed in the past.
Yeah, and you could just be making these as your ender and leaders, like, right? And then you could introduce them to a quilt. So I made these, which I call dotted lines, and I inserted it into my strip set. So you got your strip sets, and then, so that's your line, right? Line plus triangle equals square. And then the next thing you do is that we're gonna come in to one of these strip sets, and we're gonna take, I like this companion angle because of the lines on it. So this is a quarter. You can either assemble this so you sew two of them together to get half of a square, or you can sew two.
Can you hand me that white fabric
Yeah.
on top there? I want people to see because this is kind of important. If you just put that white fabric down, it was hard to see. Now let's talk about you can see the lines better. So that's how you want them, right?
Yeah, I like this particular ruler because it has the lines that, it doesn't have a bunch of different lines. It has them all going this way, and that's the way that I want them to go.
And that's so that it doesn't go wacky when you put it on here. You can keep things, because while it's improv, it is very intentional.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will say, a lot of people don't notice this about my work, but once you start looking at it, you'll see, is that these were all pieced without a ruler, right? This strip set, without a ruler. But when I make my triangles,
me, okay?
so no ruler here.
All right.
Ruler here.
Right.
Because I want them to fit together and be a certain size.
Okay.
And that's one of the ways I do it. So now we're just gonna come in and we're gonna cut. And you'll notice I've got, all right.
And I want to point out as she's cutting that you are uber picky about pressing.
Super, super picky about pressing. I always use steam, and I press, that's a whole nother segment.
Okay.
But we will say that
but
Alice and I are on the same page when it comes to pressing.
You don't want little creases in there.
No. All right, so I've cleaned this up so that it is the right size. I'm gonna do that for 4 of them.
Okay.
And then I just put them together. And that's how I get that beautiful block. There's, and you could do a bunch of different things with them, but this is definitely a scrap buster because you use strips and you even use the little teeny bit. So
Love it.
That is the first one for us to look at. Move that over there. This is the second variation. And
whoa.
Again, we're starting with strip sets. Now these are solid fabrics, and I call this particular strip set, which if we look at it here, I'll give you a better visual. So we're making a pinwheel block out of strips.
So let's put this right next to there so so they can see this is what's going on right here.
Yes.
Very intentional.
Yes, and this particular strip set is what I call a mirrored stripe. So it has one color in the center, and then these other colors radiate out from the center, so it mirrors out, right? So these are 2 different mirrored stripes. You wouldn't have to use a mirrored stripe. You could actually use a commercial stripe for any of these things. So the trick with making the pinwheel block out of stripes is that we really need to, and this one's already cut, so here we go. So we've got our strip sets of our 2 colors, and then we're going to cut them. This is the trick, is that you make them into a square before you cut the diagonal line.
What?
You have to.
Okay, so you don't use that? You don't use that ruler?
I do or I don't,
okay.
right? Here,
so this is a different maneuver we have going on here.
Well, we start with a strip set, but instead of doing the companion angle and flipping it like we would to make this block.
Why not? Because this will end up in different places then?
Yeah, you've got to, it's just that because of the angle of the, we're going to just pretend we've already cut it. I'm going to show you how. Okay, so you got the 2 strip sets that we were looking at, and I'm going to cut them into a square.
Gotcha.
Right? And that is the trick to the pinwheel block, is that it is cut into a square and then cut on the diagonal. And you could use your ruler, or I think for this one I just cut it like that.
And it's huge that you cut it in the same direction on this where it's lined up there. That's huge, right? You don't want to accidentally cut like that.
It's not going to have this effect where the stripe goes around if you do that. So the diagonal, you first cut it into a square, then you cut it in the diagonal going the same direction. They all need to go either left to right or right to left. You can't mix it up.
Okay.
And then, so I've done that with both of these, and now I come in and I just assemble them.
When people take your class, is this like a revelation to them?
Well, some of it is. It's just, when you think, and the funny thing is that so much of what you were talking about, I do sort of improvisationally. I'm like, what if this, what if I cut it this way? And then I assemble it, and then I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then I have to go back and redo it because I can't remember I was so in the moment, in the design moment, that I can't necessarily remember what I did. So then I have to go back, and it's like, okay, wait a minute, Maria, you cut these into a square, and then you cut them on the diagonal.
And then I'm gonna say this, is if you're laying them out like this, and your stripes are going in the wrong direction, stop.
Yeah.
Make sure they all are the same as
Yes.
you're going up. Okay.
Yes. And then you just assemble them into your, and I often do this, maybe it's weird, but I will lay things out to make sure that everything's working the right way. So you can see how the green
that's
goes.
smart.
Oh, that outer green is all the same, right? And that's just gonna show me. Then you're gonna pin them together. You're gonna
And
sew
so
these.
here is a traditional pinwheel block that we've done 100 times, and now you're taking it to a whole nother level. And it's not that hard to do with the stripes.
No, and it's really fun, and it gets really, I like the chaos that it creates, right? So that's that.
Would you ever use striped manufacturer fabric?
Sure. Yeah, and in fact, the first quilt that I did like this is all made with stripes.
Okay.
Yep. So.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So you want to look at the third one?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the number 3, and we're gonna
Trying to be gentle with all these exposed biases.
I know.
Man. All right.
Okay. So there's that. We're gonna grab that one.
Yeah, let's take a look at this.
Okay, so this is the third lines plus triangles equals squares. And here's your block right here. And it's actually composed of half square triangles, right?
Pieced half. Yeah.
Yep. So this is the initial block. And then you put them together in this layout. Now you could do a different layout. You could actually take this layout and try a pinwheel with it. I mean, I don't know what will happen. I haven't gotten that far. But in this case, we have a half square triangle using that companion angle, and we're cutting one stripe this way and one stripe this way. So let me show you that. So here is
This was fascinating to me.
right. So this one stripe's gonna go this way, and then on this one, we're gonna cut the stripe going this way. Okay. So let's go ahead and do it.
But hold on one second. Now that we can really see it here with this ruler, it's not, the reason you love these lines is you don't want this to happen. And that can happen really easily, right?
I'm okay with it happening a little bit, but it tells me, and I don't know, maybe it's just me. Like my stripes are going this way, and so this ruler goes this way. Now, it's not gonna be like that on this one.
No, but you've got like these arrows here going up and down too. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Let's keep.
Nope, so your strip set needs to be the size that you are gonna cut, right? So we were talking about this, like this strip set is slightly too small.
Not gonna work.
So we could either do a smaller triangle, right? Bring it down like that and have smaller triangles, or we need to piece some more onto this strip set.
Gotcha.
And I think that's another reason I really like making my own strip sets, is that you don't run out of fabric. Because you
can
just
always make more.
You can always make more. So, all right, we're going to line this up, and I'm gonna, because that edge isn't
pretty
neat.
Yeah.
I want to clean it up. So I'm gonna cut from here, and then I'm gonna clean it up. Now, and this one's a little tricky when we come to, and I am just gonna cut here and then cut here, because that will help. I can save this fabric then. Right?
Okay, why would you not, sorry to be the person to ask the question in the room, but why would you not cut a giant square and then cut it into quarters?
Well, the stripes aren't going to be going the right way.
Oh, for Pete's sakes, you're right. Gotcha.
You could try it and see what happens, right?
And I will learn.
Right, and you'll get something different, but that'll be okay, right? So the key to the block that we're doing right now, which is God's eye block, that's what I've been calling, is that one stripe is like this, and then where'd our other fabric
Where'd our guy
go?
go?
Here it is. And then the other stripe, which we're cutting in a different direction, we're gonna cut it. So in this case, the stripe is going horizontal. In this case, the stripe is going vertical.
And while you're cutting that, I think it's important to point out that you do a lot of one-woman shows. A feather in your cap would be the Shelburne Museum.
Yeah, I have a show so it's 2022. The show opened in May. It closes in October, so it was up for 6 months. It was quite the thing because it was scheduled for 2020, but because of COVID, it got pushed back, and then it got pushed back again.
Did you get to go?
Yes,
Cool.
I did. There's nothing like seeing your work up in a venue that's been designed to showcase your work. It's really, really special. So
It makes it really important, is what it does.
it elevates it. And
Yeah.
I think the Shelburne, for people that don't know, Shelburne Museum was founded by Electra Shelburne, and she is the first person to collect quilts and put them on the wall as art objects. Yeah.
Okay.
So important. So it's kind of cool that I have, So we've got our 2 triangles going in the 2 different directions, the lines, right? And then we piece them together like that. And we make 4 of them.
Love it.
And we get that. Now,
Now, if I were to take your class, would we try all of these maneuvers if it were, say, a one-day class, or would you stick to one thing and run with it?
I have a problem with stuffing my classes full of information.
Okay.
So we probably would cover all of it, which
But then a student might decide what they're going to do.
the student picks what they want to do from the options on the menu.
Okay, this is fabulous.
Yep.
Now, when we come back, what are we going to do?
Ooh, we're going to talk about what I call braided curves, and that is a super fun evolution of an improvisational curve.
Excellent. Stick around. Welcome back. Now, Maria Schell, you will be teaching us your braided curves, which is this particular quilt over here. And tell me what it reminded you of and how you got there.
Well, so this quilt's called the Texas Twerk or Ripple. It has 2 names. And I just started out with a simple curve, which a lot of people teach. It's pretty common in the quilt world, just 2 pieces of fabric. You cut a gentle curve through the middle. And then, as a lot of times with my work, I was just like, what if I did it again, or again and again? And then what if I added extra fabrics? And that's how the braided curve came about.
And that's one of the things Ricky always says is, what if? What if? And people will say, well, how's it going to turn out? I don't know. What if?
I know. Well, I call it stitching towards discovery. Yep, because we don't know where we're going. And to me, that's part of the fun. Like if you, for example, watching a movie or reading a book, like part of why you're doing it is because you don't know what's going to happen next, right?
Well, that's the fun of the whole thing.
Yes, that's the way I feel about it.
Okay.
So this is a braided curve, and this is what I'm going to show you how to make. All right?
Great.
So we're going to start out with the quilt we were just looking at had an 8 color palette.
Okay.
So typically I work with 8 to 12 fabrics when I'm doing this. And you're going to, so say you've got 8 fabrics, then you're going to make your pairings. Well, first you're going to cut.
Okay, so what are you going to cut?
We're going to cut 8-inch strip, right, by the length of the fabric.
The width of the fabric.
Width of the fabric, salvage to salvage.
Yeah.
8 inches, salvage to salvage, then you're going to cut that in half so that you actually would have 2 pieces of this rust color.
Okay, great.
Right. And as you can tell here with the black fabric and the rust colored fabric, the black fabric's a little smaller. It's probably a different manufacturer. So we are going to cut them to be the same size.
Okay, and I stole your ruler, so that's not very nice.
No, it's all right. I'm going to do it without I'm going to just do it like this. I'm just going to use the lines on my mat.
Okay.
Right? A couple of things about cutting without a ruler I have found is one is this big 60 millimeter ruler is cutter is the way to go.
Why? Because it's just 2 layers.
I know, but there's 2 things. If you think about, Alex, a push lawnmower versus a riding lawnmower. This is the riding lawnmower. And the other thing is that when you think about a 45 millimeter blade, it goes around and around and around as it cuts. A 60 millimeter is going to go further with each cut.
So there'd be less shifting with the fabric.
Less puckering, all of that stuff. So I'm a big fan of the big cutter.
Okay.
All right, so and when I'm cutting without a ruler, I really have to engage all parts of my body. And I'll say this quickly. A ruler does 3 things. 1, it's a form of measurement. 2, it's a straight edge. And 3, it's a weight. And a lot of people don't think about the weight component.
Yeah.
So when you don't have a ruler, your non-dominant hand becomes the weight.
Okay.
It's also the smoother.
It's probably you're going to have more shifty if you use your hands then, right?
Yes, so you've got to just be thinking about that. Okay, so notice how I've made them the same length. They are slightly different in width. That is okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to put it, I think this is something a lot of quilters don't do necessarily, but to place yourself strategically in front of the mat so that I find that this is a really I have a lot of control when I go at an angle like this, as opposed to going like this.
I haven't seen this before.
You just have more control.
Okay.
Right? I'm also going to keep this elbow on my cutter hand tucked in. That gives me more control. I'm using my non-dominant hand as the smoother and the weight.
Okay.
And then I'm cutting from my hips up.
All right.
Right? And I'm using my eyes to follow everything. So when you get rid of the ruler, you have now outsourced all of the things the ruler used to do to other parts of your body.
Okay. Ding. Right?
Yeah, yeah. So we've got everything smoothed out. Oh, and I should say, for every component of this, we're doing right sides up. The fabric is always right sides up.
Okay. And on this, it doesn't matter, but.
Well, it
Right.
does matter. Like, you have to designate. Good point.
Which is
you have
the-
to,
okay.
You have to designate. And if you get turned around, you might end up with a bra. So if you have a bra, you know that you sewed the wrong sides together.
Okay.
That's it. Okay.
Or turn it into a bathing suit and go to the beach.
Yes, maybe patchwork bathing suits. Yeah, patchwork clothing's very popular right now. Yep, haven't seen a bathing suit yet though. Okay, so now we've got our 2 pieces of fabric, 8 inches wide by whatever the length is so that they're the same length. Then I'm going to take my cutter, and what you can do, like I've got my blade covered right now, you can practice doing this gentle curve and practice smoothing your fabric and holding
That's
it
a
in
good
place.
idea.
Yeah, so I'm not cutting, I just was practicing. These are all things that you should do as a beginner. There's more wiggle room the longer that you've done this technique, but in the beginning, need to be the same length. We're gonna go straight for 1/4 of an inch, and we're gonna go straight for 1/4 of an inch at the other end.
Okay.
And that's gonna form a registration mark for me. There are no pins, well, there's one pin. We use one pin, no markings, no clipping, no pressing seams open, none of that stuff. Straight for 1/4 of an inch, gentle curve down the center, ending by going straight for 1/4 of an
Perfect.
inch. You ready?
Go
I'm
ahead.
gonna do it. Okay, and I'm gonna scoot you over just a little bit so that I really think it's important to be positioned over
Well,
your
I would
fabric.
think ergonomically, right?
Yeah, it's just you're gonna have more control. All right, so I'm running start, 1/4 of an inch, gentle curve, coming up on the other end, we're gonna go straight for 1/4 of an inch again.
Okay.
Put your cutter down. A lot of times what people do is they'll grab their fabric and go to the sewing machine, and then it's like, well, which side am I supposed to sew together? So don't do that, okay? So now,
Stop.
right, put your cutter down.
Take a breath.
Yeah, I go slow-mo. We're going in slow motion here, all right? So we're gonna take the top black fabric, and we're gonna pair it with the bottom orange fabric. And I always do this. Doesn't matter how many times I've done this particular curve, I am going to position them so that I see that I've got them paired up correctly. Then I'm gonna take and I'm gonna pen them. And if you went straight for 1/4 of an inch, you're gonna get this nice clean cut here.
Oh my gosh, right.
Yeah, makes a
Yes.
big difference,
Yes,
right?
yes,
and
yes.
then I'm just gonna pin it at the end there,
Okay.
right? I'm gonna do it for both of them. Now, to get the braided curve, because right now what we've got is just a simple curve. You're gonna do this twice. So twice as in, you're gonna have 2 fabrics with this color scheme, and then you're gonna do it again with 2 other
Another
fabrics.
set, okay.
Right, so you're going to end up with 4 fabrics. You don't use all of them at the same time, but they end up being pieced at the same time. So we're gonna go to the sewing machine with this.
Because you have some tips for this, right? And something just occurred to me as we were standing there. I don't think I've put on the dual feet. There. That can make your life miserable if it's not there.
We'll see here. Okay, so I've got those lined up. I'm gonna put my foot down. Okay, now I like to use the stiletto. And I use the stiletto because I don't want to stick my finger in there next to that needle.
Right.
And I'm gonna get that needle to go in the down position. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna hold the top fabric with my left hand and the right and the bottom fabric either with my stiletto or my right hand. I'm gonna have my presser foot down and my needle, I want needle down also. And if
Right.
you can, you want a single stitch needle plate and a 1/4 inch foot without a flange. Those are
Okay.
all things that are nice to have. Let's see if I can.
There.
I'm trying to get my presser foot in the position. There we
There
go.
we go.
Okay, so I am just guiding my fabric along the curve. You see how I'm pairing that fabric right as I go?
And you're not pulling either.
No, don't pull because that'll distort your curve. And sometimes I use the stiletto, sometimes I don't. I do it more when I've got more fabric and when I'm doing a steeper curve. But this is a nice gentle curve. So I'm just lining up the fabric as I go.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah, so you do your whole strip of fabric.
All right.
And then you're gonna come over here and you're gonna pretend that it's the one we were just using.
Sure.
Right? So we've made 2 braided curves. There's actually 2 of these, right? You follow me with that.
Yes, yes.
But to do the braided curve, you need, 1 2-colored fabric and then a 2 2-colored fabric.
Right.
And then you repeat the process.
All right, let me see.
Yeah, so you're gonna take, and I should point out one thing here. I call it a default curve. People tend to cut kind of the same curve. You see, this is my default curve. And most people, you'll just find that you get into a groove of cutting the same curve over and over again. If you go to make your braided curve and you put that seam right on top of the other seam,
It's just going to all be going the same like that then, right?
well, what's going to happen is you're going to end up, instead of getting a 4-colored fabric, if you cut that default curve again.
Like, let's say we're up here, this far away.
Well, we're gonna pretend for now that we're doing it right on that cut.
Oh,
okay. Because it's something that happens that they'll just come in and they cut their default curve and then they swap their fabrics. And what happens is they end up with the brown and gray.
Okay.
And the teal and black. And they do not braid their curve.
People do that?
Yes.
Okay, you're the teacher.
Yes, they do. So I'm just telling you the ways that we can avoid it.
Okay.
So one thing you can do is you can move your fabric around. 2 things, which is what you mentioned, is just cut up here, right? Don't cut where you cut your original curve. So 1 would be to make sure you're not cutting the same curve again. 2 would be to move your fabric up or down so that curve isn't on top of each other. And then the 3rd, which is probably my favorite, is you just flip the curves.
Okay, as simple as that.
Yeah, so what you're gonna want is to be able to
you can see it.
Yeah, right there. So you know that one curve is up here and one curve is here. And now,
I'm
we're gonna cut it again. So remember I said that it doesn't matter what the width is, but they do need to be the same length. So I'm gonna cut them down. And that's part of why I suggest that you guys cut pieces of fabric that are 8 by 20 inches, is that as you do this, it's going to shrink.
Right, it gives you wiggle room.
Yes, it does. Okay, so now I'm gonna start right about here. And I'm
A
gonna
little 1/4 inch.
straight, and then you're gonna do your curve, then I'm gonna come over here. And the more you do this, kind of the crazier you can get. Okay, now same thing, we're just repeating the same process. I'm gonna take the upper.
Oh my gosh, come on.
Yeah,
right?
Isn't it fun?
Yes.
Right, and so this one turned out a little bit different. Like we only have 3 colors here, and then we'll have, this one has 4 colors. And one thing that happens, which you can do intentionally, is that you could get a color to go from one end to the other, right? And that's what happened when we cut, right?
Okay.
And you can vary it. Like it's always going to be a little bit of a surprise, right? So these are our 2 braided curves.
So once you have that, then what happens?
Well, you may need, we'll just look at some other samples here.
Okay, cool. Good deal.
You may find, like here's another 3-colored one, right? And it's, a lot of times people are like, well, I ended up with this big clump of black and this big area of gray. It's like, well, braid it again. Yeah, so you would come in with another piece of fabric, maybe this one here, right? And we'll just cut these and see what happens, all right? So we've got that one and this one, which I'm not sure that I like those 2 together because...
This bothers me, right?
Right.
I want color like that,
I want more color. All right, so we're gonna do this, and that one needs to be, I'm gonna clean it up a little bit. You don't have to do this, but I just think what I tell my students is, as piecers, we cut, we stitch, we press, and then we do it all over again. Cut, stitch, press, over and over. And then I do a thing called shaping, which is actually what I'm doing right now, which is just sort of cleaning things up, making them beautiful. So we only do those simple things, so why not do everything perfectly, as to the best of our ability?
Right.
Right. Okay, so here, I could put them right on top of each other, which we're gonna do and see what happens, okay? I've got multiple seams here, and I've got multiple seams on the top, which means I don't have a whole lot of control over what's gonna happen next. We'll just see, all right? So I'm gonna cut. These need to be, they gotta be the same length, right? That just helps registration-wise. And then I am going to, let's see. Well, we're just gonna see what's gonna happen here. I'm gonna go straight for 1/4 inch. I'm gonna come in, and I'm gonna come over here. All right.
Okay, this is
So
the
now-
ta-da.
There's one ta-da, yeah. And we'll see, and sometimes different things happen. Let's see.
Now-
No, what did I do here? Okay, these two. Well, and that's something that's going to happen, which I want to avoid, is I don't want that brown to be right there, right? So I might have to do
Turn it over that way, and then you would just cut that, right?
Yeah, I might reconfigure a little
There
bit.
we go.
And then all of these things are going to come up. Like this is super skinny here. I might just want to get rid of it because
Okay.
once I do the seam allowance, it's going to be a lot of bulk with not a lot of information.
So here's the thing, Maria, is that you do teach these classes online, right? And tell us how that all works.
Yeah, so since COVID, I have started teaching, I call them independent virtual Zoom classes. I have an assistant, so she keeps everybody quiet and keeps everything, all the cameras
Zoom.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, it's awesome. So the class, I offer one a month, and they are 4 sessions long, 3 hours each session. So each session has a lecture, a demo, and then what I call a feedback session. So as you know, you take your first session, and then you've got a week to work on your project.
Well, it's
and then
like
you
you're in
come
a
back.
quilt shop.
Yeah.
It's exactly that.
Yes, you go home and you work on the assignment, and then you come back and you show the teacher, and we learn a little bit more, and then we do a little
And
more.
you do not pack a bunch of people, and you approach it like you are at a seminar or something like
Yes.
that. Okay, so how do we get on your mailing list? Because that's what I would want to do if I wanted to know, right?
Yep, you just go to my website and you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm also on Instagram under Tales of a Stitcher. Yep.
Okay.
And both of those places are really good places to find out about my workshops. And then once you take a workshop, you're invited to join my Facebook workshop group, which is kind of fabulous. And that's probably, they're the people that know first.
You know, isn't that funny how we have all pivoted in the last 3 years? And honestly, for as horrible as the pandemic was and still continues to be, some blessings came out of it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You know, totally. Thank you so much
Yep.
for coming from Alaska.
Absolutely.
Nice and warm down here.
And wet.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Maria Schell.
Thank you,
You're
Alex.
great. Okay, when we come back, we caught up with 2 women from Texas who are industry movers and shakers. And we know Nancy and Karey from the International Quilt Festival, market, and all that. But that's not the whole breadth of their story. They're very interesting women, and they have contributed a lot to the world. So we'll take a look at that when we come back. Welcome back. One of the things I love, one of the many things I love about thequiltshow.com is that we bring different people to you and we show you how they have contributed to the quilting community. Now, both Karey and Nancy are quilters, but that's not what they're known for. They're known for Quilt Market, Quilt Festival, the big flashy things that we all enjoy as quilt makers and have enjoyed for decades. But there's a lot more to these women that you're probably not aware of. Let's take a look.
Nancy did something extremely smart with quilting fabrics.
One of my best ideas was bringing together a top quilter of the day, Jenny Beyer, to the attention of a company that was producing good quality fabric, but not in the manner that quilters needed. Jenny was able to design for them a very special line of fabrics that was for quilters and with their needs in mind, with especially a lot of border fabrics and a lot of coordinated fabrics that they could use to make the quilts they wanted to
And
make.
100% cotton.
100% cotton. Meeting with this room of really grumpy, forbidding-looking old
Suits.
guys in suits and convincing them that this designer had an idea that would make them more money. And that was my contribution to that endeavor. And all of a sudden, other fabric companies decided they needed special lines of quilter fabric too.
Jenny focused on borders to a large degree. And the next thing you knew, why, there were 3 or 4 or 5 different companies putting out borders, strictly borders. One of the things that we really excelled at was making money for other people.
Yes?
back in the 80s.
I think it was 80s.
The Smithsonian really got drawn into a huge brouhaha, which I am very proud to say Nancy and I helped create.
Yes, we did.
To most Americans, the Smithsonian is America's attic. They were licensing their quilt treasury for production in China.
They were selling them at rock bottom prices. They weren't well made.
It really bothered us a lot that they never even considered that there was a quilt industry. And so we really organized everybody. We got the industry behind us, we got the quilt guilds. We went to Washington, we testified before the appropriate subcommittee.
We were the first people who had ever testified against the Smithsonian's budget.
That's right.
And when we got to the budget hearing, and we were finally called up, trembling as we were,
They said, well, this represents a great deal of money to the Smithsonian. And we said, how much money? Well, we don't know, but it's in the Smithsonian's budget. We said, you make this much money off of what you're doing. You can make this much money if you do it this way. And they changed very quickly.
it was a coup, definitely.
It was a coup.
Another thing that Karey and I were involved in was as two of the four founders of the Alliance for American Quilts, which is now called the QUILT Alliance. QUILT Alliance was created initially to save all of the memorabilia about quilts and quilting that was being stuffed into boxes under the bed and was likely to be thrown away by their heirs who didn't have a clue what it was about. So we started the Boxes Under the Bed project, and also we wanted to preserve the stories of quilters, and we created the Quilters SOS Save Our Stories project, an oral history project that is still going on today.
So, do you guys just sit around and have coffee and dream up associations and alliances?
No.
You can, like what?
We don't drink coffee. The Texas Quilt Project was something that Karey and I hatched with Suzanne Labrie over a plate of tacos, and we decided that the Texas Sesquicentennial was coming up, and it was very likely that the accomplishments of women and their contributions to history and culture in Texas would be overlooked. And we thought that was really something we couldn't put up with. And so 4 women, Suzanne Labrie, Kathleen McCready, Karey and I, created the Texas Quilt Association. And Karey and I traveled around for 2 years. I can't even remember the number of Texas towns that we went to, and we held a quilt day. And we offered $100 to the oldest, most beautiful quilt that came that day for us to look at. They were photographed and documented by volunteers from quilt guilds and arts groups in each of those towns. I must say it was a triumph, and that really became the nucleus of the first book on Texas quilts.
The first book was published by the University of Texas Press. As far as we know, it was the first quilt book that any university press had published.
Yes, it was. And that resulted in 2 more volumes after that, once they found out how many books sold.
Right.
That was the key thing.
We were really excited to be able to offer an exhibit in the rotunda of the state capitol building in Austin. People were so proud that their quilt had been selected. It was just a really rewarding thing.
It was a lovely
your
day.
heart.
It was a
lovely
reunion
day.
for a lot of these people who clustered around their family quilt, they called it. One of the most recent business decisions we made was not our most profitable, but I think it was one of the most rewarding for me personally. It was when we published a book called Christmas Quilts, Christmas Memories. And we invited people in the industry to send us their fondest memory of their Christmas, and the stories were some of the sweetest you can imagine.
I have been known to be able to date an antique quilt that I've never seen before within approximately 5 years of when it was made. I was able to get into the back rooms of the Shelburne Museum in Vermont, which has a fabulous quilt collection. And by studying the fabrics that were used in the making of the quilts and the documentation that accompanied that, I developed a real expertise in dating quilts.
My interest was really in quilt care for the layman. So I wrote a booklet called Quilt Care for Family Quilts. And it was basically the first documentation of information for average quilt owners about how to take care of their quilts, how to clean them or wash them, how to preserve them, how to display them, how to store them. And I like to think that it saved a few quilts along the way.
When there was Hurricane Katrina and practically the city of New Orleans moved to Houston, Austin, San Antonio, wherever.
We were the warehouse for all these quilts that were coming in from everywhere. And those quilts went to people in New Orleans, and the donations, I think, it was like $1 million or more to the Red Cross.
More than $1 million to the Red Cross.
So we felt that was really a worthwhile effort. When Karey acquired property in this small town of LaGrange, Texas, we were driving around with two of our staff members, and Wilma Hart and Judy Murrah, and we saw this building, and it didn't look like it was receiving the love and care that it should, so...
It was dilapidated.
It was dilapidated, and we investigated and found out a little bit more about it, and decided it was the perfect location for the Texas Quilt Museum that we'd all talked about for so many years.
The exhibits that you can see at festival are only there for a long weekend. That's it. But if an exhibit goes up at the Texas Quilt Museum, it's going up for probably 3 to 4 months at a time. So more people have the ability to enjoy the quilts over a period of time. We don't judge ourselves by a lot of the standards that other people judge. It's whether you have made a lasting impression, whether you have been able to say at the end of the day, we were here, we helped, and we hope we'll be remembered.
How do we even begin to thank these two women? What they have done for the quilting industry over the last 50 years is incredible. Karey Patterson Bresenhan and Nancy O'Brien Puentes. It's hard for me to say that because they're just my Karey and Nancy. Thank you so much. You ladies are truly legends. And while we know you for the flashy things, sometimes it's the quiet things that make the most difference, starting with the Smithsonian, right? Ooh, I remember that one. So thank you for everything you've done. We so appreciate you. And also, Maria Schell, that was super fun. I just might take a class of yours, and I behave, okay? I'm not that one. I hope you've enjoyed today's show as and just remember, it's a new day every day.